Hello, good morning. This is Tony with another quick video update on the photocurrent measurement subsystem. I was planning on getting rid of my spectral calibration and response subsystem, this is a lot cleaner version of what I had before. I was going to embed that into the PCMS so that I can get some really great data to log in addition to everything else that I'm getting. Basically, what I wanted to try to do was, okay, I've got an artificial sun system that's going to be shining specific wavelengths of light and specific intensities onto whatever device I'm going to be analyzing. The PCMS is going to pick up on those things and give me some kind of feedback saying, this is my IV data, this is everything that I would really want to know about that system. But the SCAR system was coming about because I said, well, now I want to be able to fine tune what specifically within the UVA, UVB, visible, and IR spectrum, well, how much irradiance am I getting? At least how many lux, something to at least compare it to. So my initial iteration had a lot more sensors on here, but as time goes by, a lot of breakout boards and op amps become more readily available because they're just a lot better now. So the TSL2561, the GUVAS S12, the VEML6075 I've replaced all of those with this new VEML6075 that I alluded to earlier. I've messed around with it a lot the last couple days, over the weekend too, and quite capable. There were a lot of things on here that really were in kind of advanced settings in terms of coding that I could talk about for just a little bit in terms of how I'm going to apply this to getting UV measurements inside of a black body radiation simulator device. So I've still got my TSL2591, which is actually going to give me my visible and IR intensity measurements, and I'll break those into two different groups there so I can do some calculations on the back end to show, all right, this is how much of the total lux that I'm getting that's attributed to visible, IR, and UV. So I'll just plug this in so you can kind of see exactly what I got going on here. Typical, it goes through its boot up process and gives me a ton of information readily on the LCD. Now again, this is a lot of data that I'm going to be putting into, it doesn't have the fidelity because of this just big screen. I could also try to use something later on, like what I've been using, these really small OLEDs. They're like 128 by 64. I could fit a lot more data on them. They're great, capable little screens. But I think a lot of the proof is going to be in the pudding with what I data log. So, and of course, you know, my breadboard here is just old. So, and put a lot of years on some of these breadboards. So sorry about this is kind of dimming out. So as you can see, the numbers here are kind of changing. If I turn this light and put it away, all the numbers change a little bit. So I'll talk about what they are here now. So the visible plus IR, this is what I'm getting from the 2591 sensor. This is my total lux that I'm getting, my intensity that has a function embedded into the code that I put together in conjunction with what the manufacturer discusses in terms of integration times and the sensitivity and the gain for that specific sensor. Right now I have it set up for basically what you would call indoor settings. If it's outside, it's going to get incredibly saturated right now based off of how sensitive it is right in this current configuration. So like I said, I've got analog components that talk about what the IR and what the visible is. So what I can do is at least make some claims and say, well, based off of my analog values, you can see that the IR contributes out of this 300 lux, maybe about a third or less of the entirety. So these adding up together, this is what it'll take off. It's the full spectrum intensity. So the IR plus the visible in this situation. So it'd be about a little over 10,000. So about 30% of that. So about 30 lux is attributed to, that's just, again, ballpark. 30 lux is attributed to the IR spectrum if we had to make that kind of claim. So where it starts to get a little complex here is with the UV measurements. So we've got UV alpha, UV bravo, and the UV index. And the UV index is kind of important because we can attribute that to some kind of irradiance measurement. And UV is very important because, like I said, I have UV and IR sensors, or I'm emitting that onto my photovoltaic device inside the radiation simulator. So I want to be able to make sure I'm getting pretty accurate measurements. So the UV coefficients that I'm using in this transformation here, these are the calibration numbers that convert that raw UVA, UVB readings into the UV index. And I use a lot of defaults like no Teflon, open air. I'll include this in a white paper, but there's different kind of constraints here. So it goes like 0.1 millimeter Teflon, a specific type of window, and there's like a bunch of floating point values. So if I plan to cover the sensor with a thin Teflon sheet, I can use those other values in the calculation. Basically, I might have to change my coefficients as I put them into my radiation simulator device. So the UV index, typically what some people do is, if I'm looking at this correctly, it's actually a pretty complex calculation, and it's dependent upon the wavelength range. So we take the integral over that, but what a lot of people do as a rule of thumb is if you're basing this off of STC, the standard test conditions, with a specific wavelength range of it's only visible or whatever, it looks to be about with each one UV index. So if this was 1.00, I'm getting pretty much indoor measurements from here. I don't want to get roasted and get cancer from the inside of my house. So this is accurate. This is very, very, very low number. So one UV index, or any UVI of 1.00, is approximately equal to 25 milliwatts per meter squared. And that's within usually a band between 300 nanometers to about 600. It could be a little bit less, depending on, if you're going from 280 to 400, kind of like what this is looking at, or a little bit higher towards 900 nanometers. It could be a little bit different because the wavelength between, it's calculated in steps of 0.5 nanometers, but a weighting function is applied to this. So there's different values and percentages that are attested to this total UV index or radiance value based off of UVA-B, IR visible, and just the general UV spectrum. But I'm trying to cover all of these right here, and this way I can have some great data at least to work on it later on, and then maybe make some good conclusions. But as always, feel free to send me an email with any questions. Thank you.